Chapter 3. In days of yore, when I was especially bad, when I was an especially bad young one, my punishment was having to go to the store Saturdays and work. I had to scrape off labels of other dealers' canned goods and paste on my parents' label. Theoretically, I was so forced to labor to teach me the errors of deceitful ways. A good many brats are brought up in the straight and narrow somewhat deviously. One time I had pyramids of canned goods containing a variety of fruits and vegetables, but I had used all except peach labels. I pasted the peach labels on peach cans and then came to apricots. Well, aren't apricots peaches? And there are plums that are virtually apricots. I went on, either mischievously or scientifically, pasting the peach labels on cans of plums, cherries, string beans, and succotash. I can't quite define my motive because to this day it has not been decided whether I am a humorist or a scientist. I think that it was mischief, but as we go along there will come a more respectful recognition that also it was scientific procedure. In the town of Derby, England. See the Derby Mercury, May 15th, and following issues, 1905, there were occurrences that, to the undiscerning, will seem to have nothing to do with either peaches or succotash. In a girls' school, girls screamed and dropped to the floor unconscious. There are readers who will think over well-known ways of peaches and succotash and won't know what I am writing about. There are others who will see symbolism in it and will send me appreciations, and I won't know what they're writing about. In 5 days, there were 45 instances of girls who screamed and dropped unconscious. The girls were exceedingly weak and had to be carried home. One child had lost strength so that she could not even sit up. It was thought that some unknown noxious gas or vapor was present, but mice were placed in the schoolrooms and they were unaffected. Then the scientific explanation was mass psychology. Having no more data to work on, it seems to me that this explanation is a fitting description. If a girl fainted, and if sympathetically another girl fainted, it is well in accord with our impressions of human nature, which sees, eats, smells, thinks, loves, hates, talks, dresses, reads, and undergoes surgical operations contagiously, to think of 43 other girls losing consciousness in involuntary imitativeness. There are mature persons who may feel superior to such hysteria, but so many of them haven't much consciousness. In the Brooklyn Eagle, August 1st, 1894, there is a story of mass psychology. In this case, too, it seems to me that the description fits, maybe. Considering the way people live, it is natural to them to die imitatively. There was, in July 1894, a panic in a large vineyard at Collis near Fresno, California. Somebody in this vineyard had dropped dead of heart failure. Somebody else dropped dead. A third victim had dropped and was dying. There wasn't a scientist with a good and sticky explanation on the place. It will be thought amusing, but the people in this vineyard believed that something uncanny was occurring, and they fled. Everybody has left the place, and the authorities are preparing to begin a searching investigation. Anything more upon this subject is not findable. This is the usual experience after an announcement of a searching investigation. If something can't be described any other way, it's mass psychology. In the town of Bradford, England, in a house in Columbia Street, 1st of March, 1923, there was one of those occasions of the congratulations, hates, malices, and gaieties, and more or less venomous jealousies that combine in the state that is said to be merry of a wedding party. The babble of this wedding party suddenly turned to delirium. There were screams, and guests dropped to the floor unconscious. Wedding bells, the gongs of ambulances for persons were taken to hospitals. This occurrence was told of in the London newspapers, and though strange, it seemed that the conventional explanation fitted it. Yorkshire Evening Argus, published in Bradford, March 3rd, 1923, particulars that make for restiveness against any conventional explanation. People in adjoining houses had been affected by this mysterious malady. Several names of family members of which had been overcome unaccountably were published. Downing, Blakely, Ingram. If people in different houses and out of contact with another or not so circumstanced as to mask their psychologies, and all narrowly localized in one small neighborhood were similarly affected, it seemed clear that here was a case of common exposure to something that was poisonous or otherwise injurious. Of course, an escape of gas was thought of, but there was no odor of gas. No leakage of gas was found. There was the usual searching investigation that precedes forgetfulness. It was somebody's suggestion that mysterious malady had been caused by fumes from a nearby factory chimney. I think that the wedding party was the central circumstance, but I don't think of a factory chimney, which had never so expressed itself before, suddenly fuming at a wedding party. An Argus reporter wrote that the health officers had rejected the suggestion and that he had investigated and had detected no unusual odor in the neighborhood. In this occurrence at Bradford, there was no odor of gas. I have noted a case in London in which there was an odor of gas. Nevertheless, this case is no less mysterious. In the Weekly Dispatch, London, June 12, 1910, it is called one of the most remarkable and mysterious cases of gas poisoning that have occurred in London in recent years. Early in the morning of June 10th, a woman telephoned to a police station telling of what she thought was an escape of gas. A policeman went to the house, which was in Neal Street, Holborn. He considered the supposed leakage alarming and rapped on doors of another floor in the house. There was no response, and he broke down a door, finding the occupants unconscious. In 2 neighboring houses, 4 unconscious persons were found. A circumstance that was considered extraordinary was that between these 2 houses was one in which nobody was affected, and in which there was no odor of gas. The gas company sent men who searched for a leak, but in vain. Fumes, as if from an uncommon and easily discoverable escape of gas, had overcome occupants of 3 houses, but according to the local newspaper, the Holborn Guardian, the gas company a week later had been unable to discover its origin. In December 21st, there was an occurrence in the village of Zettel, Germany. London Daily News, January 2nd, 1922. This was in the streets of a town. Somebody dropped unconscious, and whether in an epidemic of fright accounted for in terms of mass psychology or not, other persons dropped unconscious. So far, no light has been thrown on the mystery. It was thought that a current of some kind had passed over the village. This resembles the occurrence at El Paso, Texas, June 19, 1929. Scores of persons in the streets dropped unconscious, and several of them died. Whatever appeared here was called a deadly miasma. And the linkage goes on to the scores of death in a fog in the Meuse Valley, Belgium, December 5th, 1930. So that one could smoothly and logically start with affairs in the girls' school and end up with a meteorological discussion. Lloyd's Weekly News, London, January 17, 1909. Story from the Caucasian city of Baku. Yeah, that's it. Mr. Krasilrukov, the 2 companions had gone upon a hunting trip to Sand Island in the Caspian Sea. Nothing had been heard from them, and there was an investigation. The searchers came upon the bodies of 3 men lying in positions that indicated that they had died without a struggle. No marks of injuries, no disarrangement of clothes. At the autopsy, no trace of poison was found. The doctors, though they would not commit themselves to an explanation, thought that the men had been stifled. Observer, London, August 23, 1925, a mysterious tragedy is reported from the Polish Tatra Mountains near the health resort of Zakopane. A party composed of Mr. Kaznicka, the judge of the Supreme Court, his wife, a 12-year-old son, and a young student of Krakow University, started in fine weather for a short excursion in the neighboring mountains. 2 days later, 3 of them were found dead. Mrs. Kaznicka was alive. She told that all were climbing and were in good condition when suffocation came upon them. A stifling wind, she thought. One after another, they dropped unconscious. The post-mortem examinations revealed nothing that indicated deaths by suffocation, nor anything else that could be definitely settled upon. Some newspapers suggest a crime, but so far the case remains a mystery. There have been cases that have been called mysterious, though they seem explicable enough in known circumstances of human affairs. See a story in the New York World Telegram, March 9, 1931. About 30 men and women at work in the Howard Clothes Company factory, Nassau Street, Brooklyn. Sudden terror and a panic of these people to get to the street. The place was filled with a pungent, sickening odor. In the street, men and women collapsed or reeled and wandered away in a semi-conscious condition. Several dozen of them were carried into stores where they were given first aid treatment until ambulances arrived. The phenomenon occurred in the second floor of the Carey building, occupied by the clothing company. Nobody in any other part of the building was affected. All gas fixtures in the factory were intact. No gas bomb was found. Nothing was found out. But considering many crimes of this period, the suspicion is strong that in some way, as an expression of human hatred of origin in industrial troubles, a volume of poisonous gas had been discharged into this factory. It may be that in terms of revenges, we are on the track of a general expression, even if we think of a hate that could pursue people far up on a mountainside. In hosts of minds today are impressions that the word eerie means nothing except convenience to makers of crossword puzzles. There are gulfs of the unaccountable, but they are bridged by terminology. 4 persons were taken from a wedding party to hospitals. Well, if not another case of such jocularity as mixing brickbats with confetti, it was ice cream again and ptomaine poisoning. There is such a satisfaction in so explaining and showing that one knows better than to sound the P in ptomaine that probably vast holes of ignorance always will be bridged by very slender pedantries. Asphyxiation has seduced hosts of suspicions that would be resolute against such a common explanation as gas poisoning. Hold on. New York Sun, May 22nd, 1928, story from the town of Newton, Mass. In this town, a physician was by telephone called to the home of William M. Duncan. There was nobody to meet him at the front door, but he got into the house. He called, but nobody answered. There seemed to be nobody at home, but he went through the house. He came to a room upon the floor of which were lying 4 bodies. There was no odor of gas, but the doctor worked over the 4 as if upon cases of asphyxiation, and they revived and tried to explain. Duncan had gone to this room and upon entering it had dropped unconscious. Wondering at what was delaying him, his wife had followed and down she had fallen. One of his sons came next and upon entering this room had fallen to the floor. The other son by chance went into this room and felt something overcoming him. Before losing consciousness, he had staggered to the telephone. The doctor's explanation was mass psychology. It is likely that readers of The Sun were puzzled until they came to this explanation, and then, of course, mass psychology. There is a continuity of all things that makes classifications fictions, but all human knowledge depends upon arrangements. Then all books, scientific, theological, philosophical, are only literary. In Scotland, in the month of September 1903, there was an occurrence that can as reasonably be considered a case of mass psychology, as can be some of the foregoing instances, but now we are emerging into data that seem to be of physical attacks. There will be more emerging. One can't, unless one be hopelessly, if not brutally, a scientist or a logician tied to any classification. The story is told in the Daily Messenger, Paris, September 13, 1903. Yeah. Okay. In a coal mine near Coalbridge, Scotland, miners came upon the bodies of 3 men. There was no coal gas. There was no sign of violence of any kind. 2 of these men were dead, but one of them revived. He could tell enlighteningly no more than could any other survivor in the stories of this group. He told that his name was Robert Bell and that, with his two cousins, he had been walking in the mine when he felt what he described as a shock. No disturbance had been felt by anyone else in the mine. Though other parts of this mine were lightened by electricity, there was not a wire in this part. There was, at this point, a deadly discharge of an unknown force just when, by coincidence, three men happened to be passing, or something more purposeful is suggested. Down in the dark of a coal mine, there is a seeming of the congruous between mysterious attacks and surroundings. Now, I have a story of a similar occurrence at a point that was one of this Earth's most crowded thoroughfares. See the New York Herald, January 23rd, 1909. John Harding, who was the head of the department in John Wanamaker's store, was crossing Fifth Avenue at 33rd Street when he felt a stinging sensation upon his chest. There was no sign of a missile of any kind. Then he saw nearby a man who was rubbing his arm, looking around angrily. The other man told Harding that something unseen had struck him. If this occurrence had been late at night, and if only two persons were crossing Fifth Avenue at 33rd Street, and if a force of intensity enough to kill had struck them, the explanation upon the finding of the bodies would probably be that two men had, by coincidence, died in one place of heart failure. At any rate, see back to the case of the bodies on benches of the Harlem Park. No reporter of the finding of these bodies questioned the explanation that two men sitting near each other had died virtually simultaneously of heart failure by coincidence. We emerge from seeming attacks upon more than one person at a time into seemingly definitely directed attacks upon single persons. New York Herald Tribune, December 4th, 1931. Anne Harding, film actress, accompanied by her secretary on her way by train to Venice, Florida. There came an intense pain in her shoulder. Miss Harding could not continue traveling and left the train at Jacksonville. A physician examined her and found that her shoulder was dislocated. The secretary was mystified because she had seen the occurrence of nothing by which to explain, and Miss Harding could offer no explanation as to her injury. Upon December 7th, 1931, see the New York Times, December 8th, 1931, the German steamship Britsee arrived at Horsens, Jutland. Captain Ehrenkeld told of one of his sailors who had been unaccountably wounded. The man had been injured during a storm, but he seemed to have been singled out by something other than stormy conditions. The captain had seen him, wounded by nothing that was visible, falling to the deck, unconscious. It was a serious wound, 4 inches long, that had appeared upon the sailor's head, and the captain had sewed it with ordinary needle and thread. In this case, unaccountable wounds did not appear upon several other sailors. Suppose later I tell of instances in which a number of persons were so injured. Mass psychology.